Ourselves, or did you guys programs?
So I'll introduce myself and then
Please.
Maybe briefly.
go for it.
Yes.
Yeah, just briefly because you probably have all the information.
Yeah.
So I currently the co-founder of a startup accelerator called UpWest Labs, and we're based in Palo Alto. Our focus is on helping Israeli startup entrepreneurs, mainly in reaching their market and understanding how to build and accelerate their products outside of Israel. So our model is taking up to 20 startups a year and bringing them here for 3 months of a very intense program where they're coming with already a product, and their main challenge, obviously being in Israel, is that their market is really, really far away, and because of that, often they don't reach product market fit at the right time, often too late, and also their ecosystem is a lot more limited in Israel. As incredible as a place it is to start a company, in terms of market access and having around you people who can provide a lot of advice and mentorship and support, it's somewhat lacking. So we try to fill that gap for them. Prior to that, I was running for the last 10 years an organization called the California Israel Chamber of Commerce, which was a nonprofit organization I helped started in 2000. And during that time, there was very, very limited understanding of how to bridge Israel with California, particularly when it comes to opportunities for entrepreneurs to reach the market, but also for some of the large companies to go and find investment, M&A, and R&D opportunities in Israel. So we helped creating a lot of that infrastructure and bridge between the strong players in California and Israel. During that time, I met Jacques, who is a venture capitalist, an investor, and he's done a lot of work in Israel as an investor. And he joined actually my board when I was at the California Israel Chamber of Commerce. It is still on the board of the chamber. And so we've done a lot of this kind of exchange previously, mostly with startups, actually, not with investors. So this will be the first time with investors. And so I'm going to let Jacques introduce himself and talk about his background.
So just one more plug for Shuli. What she doesn't tell you is she's done such a phenomenal job with California Israel Chamber of Commerce that all the other countries that are looking to build bridges between their home state and California are seeking her as a speaker and advisor. She's been invited by the Italians,
Well, I'm actually on the advisory board for C100.
There you go. All right.
They started C100. We kind of had a lot of conversations.
She's got them all. If somebody has them all, she's got them all.
With
Yeah.
C100, I actually mentioned that there was the Israelis that helped them, and that's why they're where they are today. So maybe that's you.
You were the Israeli.
So I worked with them a lot on trying to understand how come Canada doesn't have the presence it should have in helping Silicon Valley. So they've done amazing job since then. Absolutely.
So I'm Jacques. I was originally born in Belgium. I speak French. That's why I have an accent in English and Hebrew and other languages. I studied my undergrad in engineering in Israel, and then I did graduate in the US. And then after that, decided to live in Europe for a while. Worked in very large companies. Was general manager of business in large companies. And then one day, a friend of mine who I met at school called me and said, "I'm doing a startup. Do you want to join?" And I didn't ask what the startup was. I didn't ask what we were going to do. I just said yes because that's the life that I wanted, and not work in a big company no matter how successful. That company was a huge success. We went public and we got acquired for $650 million after a few years. It was a company financed by US venture partners. And then after that, I decided wanted to, no worries. I wanted to run my own company. I did so. Bad timing, which shows you the importance of timing. The first company was from 93 to 98. The second company was from 99 to 2004. The environment wasn't quite the same. And so with that company, we eventually found a way to live despite, .com ending and all, our customers dying and sources of funding disappearing. And eventually sold the company in 2004 and then joined USVP. I have to say I've made way more money in the first company. I've learned most of what I know from the second company. And in the second company, just to give you a sense, by the time we sold the company, we had gone through about 300 employees, yet we never had more than 125 employees. So we went through 3 complete rebuild of the company in 5 years, just by the numbers of the employees. That gives you an idea of the intensity. And you learn a lot. You learn when your customers disappear. You learn when you have to go to your investors and say, you know what, the valuation of the last round, not only are we not going to do that, but we're not going to even do 1/10 of that. And it's not by my fault, even though it probably was, but the environment's changed and so on. So you learn a lot from that. And so after doing that for a while, I became executive chairman of a bunch of companies, some that did very well, some didn't do so well, and then eventually moved and became an investment professional with USVP, where I've done, actually it's a number I never computed, I've done a bunch of investments. I have to say so far, touch wood, mostly very successful. Some strong emphasis on Israel, but not only. But a lot of emphasis on hardcore, difficult things to do. So very little of the consumer side, very little of the internet side. I've done some of that too, but my emphasis has been much more on hard stuff like semiconductors and storage and cloud infrastructure and things of that nature. So and that shapes my view.
So you became VC of what? How long ago?
So effectively became a VC 7 years ago.
7 years ago.
I think the other thing also, as part of the introduction, so USVP is a very well-known firm in the Valley. I have very little to do with its reputation since it had a reputation by the time I arrived. It's 35 years old almost by now. It's 10 fund. It's 400 companies. It's 100,000 jobs that were created by investments that we've made. Just in the last 18 months, the aggregate value of the market cap of our public companies and the acquisition of our private companies, $6 billion, just in the last 18 months. So it's a very big thing, and it shapes our view. And in contrasting with what Jeff said, you have to understand that investing is a whole spectrum of things, from what Jeff does, which is micro investing, to small funds, which are the $50 to $100 million, to big funds like us. And the dynamics are different. What we're looking for is different. The way we work is completely different.
And so you were on the other side as an entrepreneur for a while, viewing the investment side from that angle. So going into the shoes of an investor, what surprised you the most about being in those shoes when you first started, your first year as an investor, a perspective that you didn't have before as an entrepreneur?
Yeah. So first, I think it's important that we don't go one side versus the other. It's the same side. And people that don't understand that it's the same side need to really understand how this ecosystem works. We are building companies. We're not there to build exits. We're not there to make a buck. We're not there to make deals. We're in the marketplace to serve the ecosystem and help people build companies. And in our case, we have an interest in building large companies. That's where we contrast with Jeff. We said, keep it small, don't double down. We'll double down, we'll triple down, and we'll try and build something that will have a very big building with a sign on it. So for me, it's important whenever there's that dialogue of VCs versus entrepreneur to bring it back to, guys who are effectively on the same side. And whether it's an entrepreneur or VC that doesn't act like that, in my mind, doesn't understand the function of the ecosystem. So the thing that surprised me the most as an investor was the completely different timeline between my job as an investor and my job as an executive in a company. In a small company, 3 months is forever. You know, you could live or die in 3 months. You have to ship product in 3 months. You know, all kinds of things happen in 3 months. In venture, you build a portfolio and you look at the outcome of what you do over 5 years if you're lucky, 10, 15 in most cases. And so the matching of the pace at which the companies live and the pace at which we live is a source of constant intellectual challenge. Because when you are meeting a company, you know, I was in a board meeting just before coming here, you know, this is a company that's gonna, you know, if all goes well, gonna go to volume in a major cell phone before the end of the year, and they're counting every week to get to the point where they know the cell phone manufacturer can't change their mind. And, you know, the guy's basically not sleeping. And I'm there and I'm thinking like him. And then I go home and I have to say, well, and that company in 3 years, in 5 years, will go public or will, you know, something will happen to it. And those are completely different perspectives that you have to constantly mash. And there's value in that mashing, because I'm there to remind the entrepreneur that, hey, what happens the day after they ship you in a cell phone? You know, you have to think about next year and the year after. And that's where the dual perspective is valuable.
And so you've talked about the ecosystem, and I think that's something we want to touch on because of Jeff's talk, obviously, that touched a lot about the seed stage investments, and you come in more at the Series A and later stage investment. So what can you tell us about that ecosystem from your perspective?
So I think, you know, there's different players in the ecosystems. There is the angel investors. Originally, they were really angels in the sense they were not making a job out of it. And then we've seen over the last 5 to 10 years, people like Jeff and others that have successfully built a platform from which they do angel. You have small funds, which are typically the $50 to $100 million, and you have the big funds. The economics under which each of those categories operates are completely different. If I give a company $1 million and it returns to me $10 million, I shouldn't even mention it to my partners because we're a $600 million fund and who cares, right? Whereas Jeff will get $10 million that will set him up for the next 2 years or whatever of investment. So it's a completely different dynamic in terms of what we're looking for, in terms of the metrics that we're judging a company by. To give you a sense, for me to be able to propose an investment to my partners, I have to show that all return, all participation in the success of the company will be at least $50 million. Right? Anything that will be smaller than that is not something we can do, even though I may love the entrepreneur, I may love the market, I may love the product. Can't do it. That's not the business we're in. Whereas earlier stage people or smaller funds will find it absolutely perfect for them. So what's important is for the entrepreneurs, and in the case of the accelerators, to understand where you're directing your companies. I'd love to meet anybody you send me, but know that if you send me a company who's going after a market that's $50 million, there'll never be a large enough companies to pass my threshold. It's not a bad company, don't get me wrong. You could be very successful with it. It could be a lifestyle business, it could be a successful company for Jeff and smaller funds to invest in, just not what we're going to do. Right? And so understanding that ecosystem is very important for the entrepreneurs, and to the extent that many of you here help the entrepreneurs succeed, that you understand it and help them navigate that. Because the first-time entrepreneur has no idea. You send them to Jeff, you send them to USVP, you send them to a small fund, it's money. They don't understand the dynamics of what that money implies, and it does imply something. If we see, for example, a company where we invested, and there's an opportunity for that company to be acquired at $40 million, and we're going to get 15 out of that, unless we think the company is not going to make it, we're going to say no. We're going to go, that is a bad idea. That is not why we think this company was invested in. For the entrepreneur, or for a small investor, they would want to say yes. right? Because at that level, somebody that has no money, it's the first time, they have 10% of the company, they're going to go home with $4 million. Their life is completely changed, right? And so when you decide on who you're going to do business with from an investment standpoint, you have to understand that the metrics by which we operate will dictate our behavior as an investor for the rest of the life of the company, right? And you want to make sure that our goals for the company matches the goals of the people. And so, for example, as opposed to Jeff, I get an allergy when an entrepreneur tells me about his exit strategy. I'm not interested in his exit strategy. I'm interested into how big a company does it want to build, how massive a business this is going to be, how big of a problem he wants to solve. The exit strategy will take care of itself. If this is a company that's going to sell $50 million, I'm not worried. They'll either go public sooner or later, or somebody will buy them for a lot of money. But I'm not thinking about that at the time of the investment. I'm thinking about how big can this be? Can this really become a massive company that's going to change something, right? And so naturally you have to understand what different groups of investors are looking for and guide yourself and your companies and the people you know towards the people that match what they're looking for.
So decision making, for an angel and for a small fund or for a small, accelerator is pretty quick and pretty, rely on certain things. Walk us through the decision-making process in a typical large VC fund or at USVP when it comes to once an investment comes through the door. What is the mechanics? What does it look like?
The mechanics are pretty standard. I mean, just about every firm works the same way, and you see that by the type of diligence people do. But they're also different depending on what we see. We will sometimes do a seed investment in which we'll put a few $100,000, and in that case our process will be different than probably not Jeff's process because I can't make a decision over coffee. But it could be a few days, it could be 2 weeks. Because it's so early stage that there's not much we can diligence. We can interrogate the market, we can check on the person, we can make an assessment of technology, but that's it, right? I mean, it's either yes or no, and then let's go. But the classical investment we'll make will be one where one of us will meet with the company for the first time, find it interesting, mention it. In our case, we have a weekly meeting where we discuss what we've seen, and then, essentially the beauty of a platform like USVP or any of the large VCs is you have the experience of 12 very sophisticated people around the table. And so I go, hey, I've seen this company. The chances that at least 1 or 2 or 3 of my partners have already seen one of those, know somebody about the space, have some company that is in an adjacent space that could help us diligence is almost 100%. And we'll actually shy away from investments in places where, hey, look, if the 12 of us know really nothing about this, we're going to have to go to school and understand it. And if I have to think of my biggest mistake or mistakes, they were always when I went beyond things we knew about. And so, we'll surface what we think are the key components of what we need to know, and then we'll meet with the company and ask a whole bunch of questions. I always tell the entrepreneurs, you'll know when we're interested. Because the day that we're interested, I'm going to be talking to you 5 times a day, and I'm going to send you emails all day long with all kinds of questions. And if you pass through that, which typically is limited, people are surprised by that comment, is limited by the company. I can ask questions faster than they can come up with answers, right? So often people say, how long do you need? Well, I know, how long do you need? I'll come up with a list of questions in 3 days. Can you give me the answers in 3 days? We're done in a week. But usually people need time to get the answers. I'd say, well, I want to talk to your key customers. Fine, I need to talk to them. I need to tell them that you're going to call them. That takes time. Today is not a good day because we're negotiating a contract, so please don't call them. So you have to work through time in that perspective. But I would say on average, we'd probably be looking at a 3 to 4 weeks process. And then we'll bring you back in. If the person that wants to do the investment is convinced, we'll go to his partners and say, I want to do this investment. Please listen to the story. And at USVP, we'll make a decision that day. The person will leave, and we'll say goodbye, thank you, we'll call you later, and we'll meet among ourselves and go yes or no. Very rarely we'll say yes with a condition,
Okay.
and then we have to go clear the condition. For example, it could be, yes, but we really want to have this person that knows this space look at the business plan and tell us what they think. Or yes, but we really want to talk to this customer that we haven't talked to. But in most cases, it's a yes, no. And then, and then it happens pretty quickly.
So you already mentioned one of the criteria is having a large enough market. And what's beside that is a criteria for you in terms of a company that you're looking at that will be interesting for you?
So I think team is always critical, right? I mean, there's no doubt that there's a small subset of the population that can be an entrepreneur. I think, one of the current trends that I find misleading is sort of this sense, which sometimes is taken from comments of other people, that anybody can be an entrepreneur if only they try hard enough, right? If people tell you no, just keep going, never give up, It's not true. It takes a very special individual to be an entrepreneur. Not everybody can wake up and be an entrepreneur. It's a character. You have to be a little crazy. You have to be very, very smart. You have to be very tenacious indeed, but you have to have all those other qualities. And then the other thing is you have to be wanting to solve a problem. I tend, and that's a personal taste, I tend to not be very attracted to people that say, I wanted to do a startup, I thought about it long enough, and I decided I was going to do this one. I feel much better when somebody wakes up and says, I found this problem, and I think I can solve it. And the only way I can solve it is by doing a startup. But the focus shouldn't be on the startup as a lifestyle, which is sometimes the case, or as a goal in and by itself, but a means to address something that bothers you. You can't possibly go to bed tonight without knowing that you've done something towards solving this issue. And it could be a medical thing, it could be a business thing, it could be a technical thing, but you want to solve that. And you know that you know the answer, and I'll go do it. And I think it's important to have that filter. And I take the opposite view. I think that it's better to tell somebody as nicely and as honestly as you can, look, I don't think this is going to work, and here is why. Now, by all means, go back and think about it, and if you have a new perspective, come back to me, I'll talk to you again. But I'm not going to let you burn 4 years of your life where the position in which I sit, I can see with a pretty high probability this isn't going to happen. And I'm not going to say no for the world, I'm just going to say no for me. But I'm also going to say, especially if it's a friend, that if 5 other people that have the same experience that I have say no, you should really think about it, right? And you always have counterexample, right? When Google came to be, everybody looked at their business plan and puked on it, right? Search had been a really bad domain, the guys were crazy, they had no business plan, they had no monetization plan, and why the hell would you want to do that deal? And I'm sure if I had seen it, I would have said no. So there's always sort of the exception, and people want to latch on to the exception to say, I'll be that exception again. And you can be. The odds are just very, very small. Mm-hmm. And if you want to be successful, chances are you need to go after something that you actually understand, know something about. Just Jeff Commons, you're not going to go and solve the problem of hydraulic heels if you don't understand how people manufacture shoes. You have to know something about. You have to have enough experience to know that you have the means to solve the problem, and you have to go after something that's actually worth solving. There's a lot of times where we see businesses and we go, yeah, and even if it works, who cares, right? I mean, does that really address a need that enough people in the population will have an interest in? And that's particularly hard in the consumer space, where we as consumers always think that we are specialists, right? I know how to shop, I know how to buy this, I know how I would want this. And we tend to project our own views as consumers of what a consumer company should do. It's usually not a very good proxy for what the market actually wants.
Interesting. How complete should the team typically is when when you see them? So you mentioned that the entrepreneur really wants to solve a big problem, needs to go after a large enough market, be very much going after a need. Do you care about who else is in the team?
I think it depends on stage.
Okay.
We back 2 guys and a dog.
Yeah.
If they're at the stage where you'd expect to have only 2 guys and a dog, if you come to me and you say, I'm going to sell to AT&T and Comcast, yeah, I want to see a marketing person that has sold to AT&T and Comcast before, because if you don't know how to do it, I don't want you to discover it in this company, right? If you're going to go and say, I'm going to penetrate the US consumer market and I'm going to use, viral marketing and whatever, those are things that have, a science behind them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a body of knowledge, and you can't just go, I'm a smart guy or a smart girl, I'll figure it out.
Right.
So the further along you are, the more we'll be looking for consistency. Now, one element which I think is very important is that the very first test for me of the validity of an idea is if you can convince people to come and work for you on that idea. And if you can't convince people to work for you, then you're either not explaining it very well, or it may not be such a great idea, right? And so it's always a very good test that you've been able to attract people, especially if they know the field, if it's a field where there is specialties that so-and-so who actually knows the space has agreed to join. It'll go a long way towards our diligence, because somebody that is a domain specialist is voting with their own time, and time is much more important than money in this case. They're going to spend 4 years or 6 years of their life working with you on this idea, and they know the space. That goes a long way in convincing me that this is a good idea.
So you invest in both in the U.S. and outside of the U.S. You invest internationally as well, and obviously when you invest outside the U.S., there are additional factors and additional things that are kind of added to that decision-making process. Where are you investing besides Israel?
We're practically not investing outside of the U.S., if not in Israel. Canada being, North America. We have done very, very few investments in other places.
In other places, but...
And to the extent we have, they haven't been very successful.
And you've been investing in Israel for the last
20 plus years.
20 plus years, done successful companies like Checkpoint and Sandisk and some of the large companies that came out of Israel went public and succeeded. What works and what doesn't work for a venture fund, like when you look at USVP's investment, investing internationally?
So I think in our case, there's sort of a binary decision of whether we feel the country that we're investing in has legal processes and ethics that match ours. And if the answer is no, frankly, it really doesn't matter what we're going to see. We're just not going to do it, because we know we don't understand. We don't want to find ourselves in a court in a country that we have no idea, how things work. We can't apply our logic. If we have a problem with a company in Israel, we go to an Israeli court. Even if the person doesn't understand Hebrew, it's based on the British legal system, and so you kind of apply your logic of how this should work out, and you're within 5% of the truth. It's much harder when you don't have that frame of reference. So I think that's a very big one. Then I think there's the question of, does that country have represents a market in it by itself, right? And so, or has direct access. And so around Russia and a lot of the former republics around it, where you have a language community, you can say, well, there's a market of size. Mm-hmm. Now we, as a USVP, do not understand how to penetrate those markets. We have no idea. And I don't mean that in a negative way. We don't have the knowledge. I'm sure other people do, we don't. And so we'll be very reluctant, as a means of bad investment, I'm just saying for USVP, to invest in something that's going to go after the Russian-speaking market. I don't know how to hire a VP of marketing that speaks Russian. I don't know what channels I'm going to find that are going to help me to get users. I just don't know. Now, intuitively, I want to believe that those markets have potential. I think the same is true for Latin America. I think Latin America has huge potential, and we see adoption of technologies at a pace which is shocking me. We have companies which typically do not enter the South American market until later in their life, sort of in year 3 or year 4, are going to market, and they open an office, and 9 months later, it's 15-20% of the company worldwide sales.
Wow.
So the adoption of technology in South America, we have found to be stunning. And by and large, the legal systems and the distribution channels are clear enough. They're not perfect, there's still work to be done, but they're clear enough that we can do business there. Now, we haven't done investment there because, again, we don't know how to hire the people, we don't know how to find them. I think when you're in the situation, that's the case of Israel, where you have no internal market to speak of because of restriction on the language or geography or whatever, then we're going to invest with the theory that this is going to be a company that's going to be penetrating either the US or the European market, right? And at the point that you do that, then you absolutely have to judge them with the same filter that you would judge a US or UK company. There's no break, right? I mean, you don't get credit because you came the hard way from some country that's emerging, and we really want them to be successful. But when you come to investing, we can't take that into account. It will just go, your competition is in Palo Alto, right? I mean, you're going to have to be judged against a US company going after the same market. And you're going to be not only better, but you're going to be much better for us to take the additional risk of not investing next door with people that we know, and to go to Estonia or to Ukraine or to South America to go find a company that will come and attack the US market. Now, it happens, and that is a model that can work. What you have to understand when you talk to companies is that's the filter that they have to pass. They're going to be better than a US company, and that's hard. It's hard because there's little experience, there's little talent, and so you have to really, we have this discussion very often, you have to really hold them to the highest standard. It's unfair to them to make them believe that somehow they're going to make it if they don't clear that bar. They won't. There's just, life is tough. Darwin works. Evolution selects the strongest. It's near impossible. There's, the odd case of a Skype or something like that. There's always a counterexample. But you can't build a business, you can't build an economy around a one-off. It always has to be something that makes sense. So, that's the other case. Now, there's the last case in which we don't invest, but some people are very successful at, which is what we call fast follower, where people can be very attuned to what's going on in the US market and then see emerging new companies in the US and then do effectively a copy of that to go after a local market. And that's a very successful financial outcome, especially in Europe.
Yeah.
Name any successful US company, you'll find 2 or 3 European copycats, which sometimes get acquired by the US companies, sometimes succeed in their own markets. We don't do that, almost because we don't understand how the dynamics works. But you need to know, if you have incubators in faraway countries, that is absolutely a possibility for your companies to be successful, is just focus on the local market and do something that has been proven to work somewhere else. We can't do that, but that doesn't mean it can't be done, right? But I think it's important to be honest with the entrepreneurs, that's what it is, and don't kid yourself that if you do, Facebook lookalike or Twitter lookalike or an Instagram lookalike, you're going to somehow penetrate the US market. Not going to happen. That doesn't mean you can't be successful locally. I mean, I have, especially from Europe, I have a lot of friends that are quite successful through like Series C and Series A in Europe, and then they want to come to the US for Series B, and I go like, yeah, okay, maybe, but don't take that to be the only route. You could be very successful as the European company that does that. Right? Sure, you're going to make it bigger and you make it to the US, but the filter is tougher.
So I know we have 5 minutes. Maybe we should open up for questions. That would be great.
So yeah, just based on everything you were just saying, so this company in particular started in Belarus a year ago and we're very successful there. So then half a year ago they opened an office in Moscow and some people were very successful. 3-4 months ago they took it to the US. We incorporated in the US. So now, now actually we're deciding, like, shall we focus on the Russian market at all, hire people there to kind of extend the business, or shall we bring all the focus in the US? I mean, it's going to be a peer-to-peer fundraising platform, kind of online auction of meetings. And mentality is a little bit different, so we kind of tested the exact same model we do in Belarus, which is actually very successful there. Didn't really work, so we kind of tweaking it around a little bit. But the question is, with all the red flags we were saying, dealing with foreign companies, foreign offices, culture, language barrier, shall we market as a U.S. company, or focus on the U.S. company, or how shall we position our offices in other countries?
So, it's a very difficult decision. You can't do both.
Yeah.
Okay, if you're going to try to do both, you're going to fail at both. So if you decide to go after the US, you're going to be single-minded about making the US and using your success in Belarus and the other location as a prototype of what you could do in the US. You can't transport what you've done and literally do it. You have to restart in the US very humbly and say, we've learned a bunch of stuff there, and retest every aspect of it. Because especially when you're dealing with consumers and behaviors around that, culture is completely different, right? Even within the US, you might find differences between the large cities and the smaller cities, but for sure between what you're going to see in Eastern Europe, Belarus, and others, and what you're going to see in the US is completely different. So it's one or the other. I would look at the risk reward. You seems to have almost made it or completely made it there. Do you want to sort of focus on that and continue that and be the best company ever in that space, in that region? Or do you want to make a big gamble and say, hey, could we be the best worldwide company in this space? Tough decision, very tough decision. One thing is sure is you need, in spaces like that, you need Americans in the management team. You can't fake culture. You can't say, I'm going to bring a bunch of my executives from Belarus here, they're going to live here, and they're going to understand the American consumers. You have to have lived 20 years. I can tell you, I've lived here, for 19 years now, and I'm still discovering what it is to be American.
But what if with such experience, by bringing on board American co-founder, American CEO to run the company? Because in many cases, some of these consumer internet ideas, they use the same culture around the globe, but with different applications in different countries. So let's say we discovered in Ukraine that Twitter actually works. So then we come here, we understand that it's very difficult to find appropriate channels. But do you think it would help to have right away somebody who is local, who is with 50 years of experience, or who was born here to run the company?
It would, and for sure, hiring somebody like that would be testimonial to the fact that at least he or she believes that you can make it in the US, which, as far as I'm concerned, would be validation.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a co-founder. It could be a first employee.
It could be, President USA. You can work around that, but you have to go for somebody that's good, not just somebody that you can find. But then you still have to watch with the culture. For example, with Israel, we are very, very reluctant to put an American CEO on top of an Israeli company. It's not like we never do it, but it's going to be if we really can't find another way to do it, because the culture between the way the company is run internally and the CEO is very difficult to match. And so that culture gap, you've solved it by having, a U.S. management team and a U.S. CEO, but now you've created another culture gap, which is now inside the company. Again, not impossible, but a challenge.
this is actually one of the first things that, you know, we're trying to focus on with our entrepreneurs when we bring them to Silicon Valley for 3 months, is not only, you know, go after finding your customers and market and, you know, build a better product, but it's also how do you to understand the nuances of the culture and start opening up their ecosystem to potentially, you know, new hires that could eventually complement their teams here. You know, either on the advisory board level or on the marketing side, which, you know, for a lot of them it could be a great added value for their company. So we find that, you know, it's something that they will have to do in the future. If they can start building that ecosystem now when the company is still young, it could help them later on.
Another element you have to watch, especially when you're in the consumer space, the velocity at which the valley changes what's fashionable is crazy. You know, whatever was a good idea 6 months ago is a bad idea. Right?
Yeah.
And so the time of propagation of that wave to any remote geography is a real hindrance in those businesses. Because by the time you developers in Belarus or wherever they may be really get what just happened in Palo Alto 6 months ago, they're already too late. Because Palo Alto is now onto something else, right? And we see that, for example, often in even things like the development platform that they use, the software techniques that they use, get out of fashion very quickly. You know, which database do you use, which programming language you use, which user interface you use. It's very dynamic, and so in those spaces, it's very hard to compete with California in the California market. It doesn't mean you can't compete locally, because they don't understand your market. And by the time they arrive, then the lag plays in your favor, because until they arrive to you, you've had 1, 2, 3 years where your local market wasn't aware of what was going on in Palo Alto, and you were the only thing they knew about. Right? So you got to look at that. And geography, at the end of the day, despite the internet and Facebook and everything, geography does matter. Mm-hmm. Distances are still there.
So, like legally wise, though, we would be comfortable, right? I mean, since we incorporate in the U.S., I mean, it's a U.S. company, so if there's anything, we're going to adopt in the U.S. for it, right?
Yeah, though, you know, there's still going to be a bit of a question mark. You know, you could have an employee issue in Belarus, and how are we going to deal with that, right? What if there's a sexual harassment lawsuit in Belarus? What do I know about sexual harassment laws in Belarus? But that's the point I'm making. That's the point I'm making, right? And so if there's an issue, I have no idea, right? And I took that example. It could be an employee issue, right? I mean, he went on strike. I mean, I have a story of an employee in France who went on sickness leave, and we found that he was working for another company using our computers while he was on sickness leave, and we fired him. We lost in court, right? I mean, in the US, this would be undisputable. You just go to him and say, you're fired. We did that in France, and, you know, he sued us for illegal termination, and we lost. So that's where, you know, those gaps are still there. And you have to assume that an American investor that's going to look at a hybrid company, whether consciously or unconsciously, is going to move the bar up versus the exact same company in San Francisco, even in Texas, right? Which is not a foreign country.
So we might have to wind up.
Sure.
Now. It's been fabulous. So thank you so much for all the information
Enjoy
you've given
business.
us.